photojournalism was like a new thing to me. I wasn't one of those guys that kind of, studied, Kappa and Einstein and, all these other, greats out there. I just kind of fell into it because I still kind of sucked. I mean, I knew how to put stuff on the happy face mode and the Nikon, but other than that, I didn't really have a lot of technical knowledge.
Hello and welcome to this very special first episode of the Photo Forward podcast. Today, more than ever, we're inundated with photos, videos, GIFs. But sometimes an image stops you in your tracks. It grabs you by the collar and doesn't let go. That's visual storytelling. That's photojournalism. So who makes this arresting work, and what can we learn from them? On Photo Forward, we're going to dive in deep on exactly that every week. We're exploring the stories behind some of the greatest visual storytellers in the world. From their photographic origins to finding work-life balance as creative professionals, to how to actually make a living as a photographer, videographer, or multimedia creator. We're going to uncover what makes them tick and their shutters click. I'm your host, Ben Brewer. When I was thinking of how best to start this weekly series, at first I gravitated to the idea of interviewing a big-name photographer, capitalize on their status, and get listeners hooked from the get-go. But I realized early on that didn't jibe with my whole philosophy for undertaking this. I'm in it for the long haul. Obviously, I want to connect with incredible photojournalists the world over, but the soul and purpose of this show, educating photographers on the art of visual storytelling, from photographers with stories of their own, that fascinates me. So when I stepped back to thinking about photographers with fascinating stories, unique philosophies, and with whom I've got a personal connection, it was actually pretty obvious who to invite first. My mentor and friend, Jerome Pollos, who gave my career a massive kickstart at my first internship at the Coeur Press back in 2010. Jerome Pollos is an award-winning Northwest photojournalist specializing in documentary work, weddings, and portraits for clients that love timeless, candid moments. On Instagram, at The Roamer, and Twitter, Jerome Pollos, that's Pollos. In this episode, we unpack a ton of interesting stories about finding your visual style as a photographer, how to totally screw up a long-term documentary photo project, and how to make that earth-shattering move from a staff photographer position to a full-time freelancer and not losing your mind and bank account in the process. You can find show notes with photos and links online at photoforward.media/podcast/Roamer. That's Romer. I hope you guys get as much out of this listening as I did recording it. So without further ado, our interview with photojournalist Jerome Pollos. Jerome, welcome to the Photo Forward podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so a little bit of backstory, I guess, to get people understanding a little bit more about why I wanted to have you on the show. We met back in 2008. I was a sophomore at Grinnell College. I was looking around for internships at newspapers. I kind of figured out that I wanted to do photography as a career, applying all over the place, getting rejection after rejection. And I reached out to you as one of the contact listed for internship positions. Little did I know at the time that there wasn't actually a formal internship. I reached out to you and you said something to the effect of, this is going to be an unpaid internship. We're going to work your ass off, but at the end of it, you will be a better photographer. And, at first I was a little college kid. I was a little terrified, but, I dove in and I learned so much from you and Sean at the press, and you guys really treated me like a staffer. You pushed me and gave me that real push start in my career. So that's the sort of background here, and I just want to thank you for all that you did to kind of get me started.
No problem. I'm glad we could abuse you, and hopefully you got something valuable out of it, and hopefully it got you where you are today.
Yeah, I can definitely say that it did. So you're doing a lot now these days as a freelancer after 13 years at the Coeur d'Alene Press. But I want to go back a little ways to give some context for you as a photographer. Tell me a little bit about how you got started in photography, and go back a little ways here.
Oh, that's an interesting story. So I was a troubled youth, let's say, in California, and I was looking for the quickest way out of trouble. And like many people, I found the military would be the quickest route. And so when I went to the detailer, I talked to him and said, I don't want anything that's going to screw me over. I don't want to join the military and like peel potatoes or paint the side of a ship or some other stereotypical cartoon caricature of the military. And he asked me what I like to do. And I told him, I don't really do anything. I've DJ'd a few house parties and goofed around with that. He's like, cool, you'll be a radio DJ. I thought he was full of shit. I was like, there's no way, radio DJs in the military. He's like, no, it's like Good Morning Vietnam and Robin Williams. They got that. I was like, okay. So passed the test to make sure I could go to the school. Everything worked out, went to boot camp, went to the journalism school in Indianapolis called the Defense Information School, and was there for a while. And they had a big segment on broadcast journalism, a big segment on print journalism, like a month kind of segment on public and media relations, and then like a 2-week course on photojournalism. I was doing great on everything, hopped into photojournalism, and I failed. I sucked at photography and didn't really care about it because I didn't want to be a photographer anyways. I wanted to be a radio DJ. So I put in what's called a dream sheet, where you get to pick where you want to go for your first duty station. And I picked Suda Bay, Crete, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. All islands, radio stations, nice beaches. And they sent me to Washington, D.C. to a newspaper, where immediately upon arriving into the office after driving cross-country for 2.5 days, they give me a camera and say, hey, you're a photographer and your first assignment's tonight. That sucked. And so I went through and took my pictures, and actually I got help from some nurses and a doctor at this hospital I was taking pictures at. They helped set up the camera and put it on the happy face for me so I didn't mess up the photos. Turned in my 3 rolls of film, wrote my story. And then the next, on Monday when I came back in, boss calls me in and said, hey, these photos turned out okay. You said you sucked at photography. I was like, well, I do. He goes, well, something happened. I was like, well, they set up the camera for me. It worked out. He's like, okay, well, we're going to use these in the newspaper. And they did. They, put a nice double truck in there. Front page was mine. And lo and behold, the family came in that had their son on the front page later on, and basically told me, that this photo was the last kind of great photo they had of their son, that, where he was smiling, and they wanted to get a really nice print of it so they can hang it up in his little brother's room so he can always remember his little brother, because he ended up passing away from cancer. So that changed it right there. Like, who the hell wants to be a radio DJ after, realizing the power that photography has in those situations? And from there on, my boss, Al Twyman, he threw me into the mix. So like anytime there was a big name photographer or publication coming on the base that needed media tours, he made sure I was a guy. So, Michael Williamson and Susan Biddle and Mike Wolf and all these guys that worked, at the Post and USA Today and Washington Times and all these other places, I got to just kind of tag along and pick their brain and see how they worked. And that was a start. That's where I went from teenage troubled youth to wanting to be a radio DJ to finding my way into photography.
Wow. Tell me a little bit more about the photo, actually, that caught the family's eye. Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, it was this picture of this kid, bald from chemo, and he had a cockatiel on top of his head, and it was a pet therapy program that I was actually taking pictures of. And there was probably about, I don't know, a dozen kids or so, and this local 4-H club and a couple other people brought in, various animals that were I guess okay to bring into a pediatric oncology ward. And it was basically this there to kind of brighten up the kids' day. They brought in chinchillas and snakes and birds and all sorts of stuff. And it's funny because one of the photos they got was one of the first photos I took of the kid, and it was blown out to hell. I had this, it was a Nikon N90, and I had a potato masher Met Splash, one of those big dogs, looks big grip that goes on the side of the camera. And I had that thing full blast, and I blinded the poor kid, and it was just horrible. And then I think it was a doctor that said, "Hey, you need to adjust that, otherwise you might end up hurting somebody." I was like, "Oh, okay." And so we adjusted the flash, and then and after that, I think it was like 3 frames later, I got that picture, and it worked out really well. It was kind of cool.
That's great. Yeah, and just like that emotional connection you made with the family for being able to make that picture. That's pretty great.
Yeah, it was good stuff. It kind of kick-started me in the right direction.
So that was kind of that defining moment for you kind of knew. And I think, a lot of photographers listening kind of have all had that sort of moment of, yeah, this is it. What did you kind of see as your sort of career goals at that time?
At that time, I didn't really know. Photojournalism was like a new thing to me. I realized, from that moment on, the power it kind of held and the importance of it. But I wasn't one of those guys that kind of, studied, Cartier, Kappa and Einstein and, all these other, greats out there. I kind of, I just kind of fell into it. So after that, the mission was just kind of learn how to take pictures, because I still kind of sucked. I mean, I knew how to put stuff on the happy face mode and the Nikon, but other than that, I didn't really have a lot of technical knowledge. And luckily I worked at the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland at the time. And they had a darkroom there where all the medical photographers work, and medical photographers are extremely technical. I mean, down to, what temperature processing their films at and how much fixer they're using and all this stuff. So I got a really good technical education in photography through them. And then with my job shadowing and basically just contacting whoever I could that I admired at the time and seeing if they would help me out, I kind of got the inside of the photojournalism part. And I was still in the military, so it wasn't like, I was a college student who could go do internships or I could freelance somewhere. I was still obligated for another, at that point, 3.5 years of service. So my main goal was just kind of see if I wanted to stay in the military, if I wanted to leave. And I was thinking I was going to go, shoot for the Blue Angels. That'd be my next duty station, or work for the White House Communications Agency, the military component. But they ended up sending me to a ship instead. And so I went to a ship and realized that being gone 10 months out of every year wasn't for me and my family. So I got out, and the ultimate goal was to go to school here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho for 2 years to knock out some prereqs, and go to Western Kentucky University and have Mike Morse kind of brainwash me in the fundamentals of photojournalism. And I never left. I got a job as soon as I got up here at the Coeur d'Alene Press. And I kind of made that decision. Do I want to go to school and pay, $85,000 plus to get an education so I can get a job offer that I just got offered? Or do I take this and see where it goes? So I took the job at the press, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I think that's a really common theme amongst other photographers, is that kind of question of like, all right, where do I go from here? Is it go find that kind of small town, smaller paper, or do you do the graduate school thing? And I think it's changed a lot recently, but I think that seems to be a thread a lot of people are going towards, is leaning towards the on the job experience.
Yeah, and I think for me, having a family and I wasn't like the 19-year-old going straight into Ohio or Western Kentucky or San Francisco, those big universities. I was 24 and had a few years above everybody, but I was just at a different direction at that point, I think, and I realized that with a family, I couldn't just, kind of just constantly move and bounce around, which a lot of the interns that we had who came through the press, I mean, that's what you do is, you work the smaller newspapers and mid-sized newspapers as stepping stones until you get to the place that you want to stay at. And that usually means that every year to, 2 or 3 years, you kind of go from one place to another until you find, your landing spot where you want to stick around. And hopefully in today's kind of atmosphere, you can stick around for a while until you get your feet under you to become a freelancer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you get started at the press. You take the job there. Tell me about those first couple years when you're started there. how were things structured? How did you get along? How were some memorable moments from then?
Well, it was kind of interesting because when I got here, they only had one photographer on staff, and that person wasn't working out, and so I heard about it. So I turned in a portfolio. Well, there was another photographer that I just met who worked at a local camera store named Jason Hunt, and he had applied too. And since I was going to school, they couldn't quite work around my schedule, so Jason took the full-time position. And then I came on basically as kind of a freelancer. And then immediately after I started freelancing, they said, "Hey, we need a writer who can also take photos." Well, in military journalism school, they teach you how to write as well. So I had some writing samples, and I got the job as a writer photographer. And I did that from about 2000 until 2004, 2005 timeframe. And I finally drove the managing editor nuts by every week we had a meeting, and they would always say, "Anything else people want to talk about?" And I'd always raise my hand at the end of the meeting and said, "Hey, I think we really should have 2 full-time photographers." And after about 4.5 years of saying that, they finally decided it was a good idea, and they hired me on the second full-time photographer, which was great because Jason Hunt at the time, he was one of the best photojournalists I've ever worked with. In fact, he was like #1 in the state for a while, and it's Idaho, so you don't think that much of it, but he was making a name for himself, and he had some opportunities, and so we pushed each other constantly. We were never competitive against each other. We were competitive against ourselves, and we pushed each other constantly, and that really helped develop the way I kind of approached things and looked at stuff. And then places like A Photo a Day and Melissa Little and Dave Holloway and Chip Litherland and Bob Crosland, all those guys on that listserv were really instrumental in kind of tearing my images apart and really giving me some insight and things to think about. I was trying to shoot everything super clean and straightforward. And Melissa Little said, nothing, it doesn't have to be perfect all the time. Leave some room for an image to breathe and give yourself an opportunity to kind of see how stuff unfolds. And Holloway was really instrumental in telling me, it wasn't so much about style. It's about, how you communicate and, attract certain people, and how you kind of, interact with the people you're photographing. That determines a lot more how the quality you can build into your images versus style. So a lot of that, those early days at the newspaper is a small component of it, but like A Photo Day and some of these workshops I'd go to and just networking really helped push me to kind of find what I wanted to do ultimately and how I was going to do it.
It is kind of that early stage where one's trying to find the style. I think that's, for a lot of people, it takes decades to really find your kind of unique style of photography, and that sort of coaching aspect, the mentoring aspect is a really big part of that. I want to get to that later because I think that's a really big part of something I've seen that you've started with, doing some business mentoring for photographers and coaching in that way. But I want to get to that a little bit later on. So going back into the time at the press, as an intern, I was shoved into situations that I definitely wasn't comfortable in, and that's kind of the nature of it. Tell me a little bit about a really notably like challenging or difficult assignment or project that you worked on.
So for me, projects were kind of my bread and butter. Like, I loved working on long-term projects, and one of the first long-term projects I did was an Alzheimer's story. And it's kind of like the cliche story that every photojournalism student works on, is a homeless story or an Alzheimer's story. And I knew that it was cliche, so I wanted to try to take a different approach to it. And so I found this guy through a phone call that our editor at the time, Bill Bewley, had forwarded to me because the guy was pissed. And this is when I was still writing. And this old guy was mad because we didn't show up to his wife's care facility's Christmas party. And he's, in his, early 80s and, just upset that we weren't there. And it's something we would normally cover anyway. So he was telling me about all this stuff, about how, his wife's been in this care facility for a few years, and, they care for her better than anybody. And I kind of got some background that, she came down with Alzheimer's, and he was living alone, but, he visited her every day. And it kind of intrigued me about how we always hear about the people with Alzheimer's and the approach that way, but it's not, at the time, it wasn't really popular or wasn't done where it was showing how people who were dealing with their loved ones having Alzheimer's. And this was a unique case because this gentleman, Herb, he, was married for, like 50 something years. And he was, came from the Better Homes and Gardens generation, where he'd come home and his wife would have his slippers and his robe laid out and the newspaper and, would make him a drink while she got dinner ready. And, he was relying on her for everything, and she's gone. And so he was basically, an 84-year-old bachelor, trying to learn how to cook and clean for himself and manage the house and everything else that his wife did for, 50 plus years. So that's the approach I wanted to do. And I went out and I started it, and I, did some photos, and I talked to him a little bit, and he was like, well, when's the story going to be in? And I was like, well, it's not like a simple, quick story. The idea I have is this. And I told him, what the story was about, him trying to learn how to, fend for himself as his wife deals with Alzheimer's. And I wasn't really clear on what the end of the story would be. And I knew what it was going to be. It was going to be either when he passed away or she passed away, because, that's kind of the finality of it. And I didn't have enough guts to tell him because I was pretty new at this. And so it went on for about 6 months, and he was getting mad that I wasn't doing it. And we kind of getting a little spats about it. And then he'd have me over for dinner, and we'd do more photos. And then I brought a reporter on because I thought, well, maybe I need somebody to write this because I don't feel like I'm confident enough to write it. And so I brought on a reporter, and she borrowed some photos from him, of him and his wife, and said that she was going to get the story going, and she was going to send over a little proof so he can see where she was headed. And then she just never talked to him again for like a month, and it really made him mad. And so he told his son about what was going on. And then within a week after that, his wife had died. And his son was really upset, just overall in general, and Herb was upset. And so his son called up and told the editor at the time, the managing editor, that the reporter had stole some photos and the photographer had wasted everybody's time, and he wants all the stuff back. And I was like, holy crap, this just happened, and the editors asked me about it, and I told them, yeah, I've been working on this for like 9 months, and here's what I got, and this is what I was trying to do. And he's like, well, have the reporter, give you the photos, you meet up with them, apologize, give the photos back, and see if it can be salvaged. And it wasn't salvageable. The family didn't want to have anything to do with it. And that 9 months of work materialized into nothing. It never saw the light of day. Oh, wow. And so that was like my roughest project ever, because I worked on it so hard, and it was my first one, and I was so ambitious, but I didn't have any confidence in my writing and approach, and I didn't have any confidence in how to tell somebody, that the story's over when you or your wife dies. And if I would have just started with that, I think it would have been fine. But that was definitely a lesson learned, to be clear and direct in what you're trying to do with the story and what you need from it from the get-go. Because if you're not, you're just wasting everybody's time. And I did. I wasted everybody's time, and that was a tough lesson to learn.
Yeah, nine months is that's a real long story to really engage with for that long, both kind of technically in terms of your time as well as just kind of emotionally being a part of that.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those learning situations. But when I stepped into the next story, I was ready. I knew how to be direct and tell them exactly what I needed and make sure that everybody was on the same page. So it made the process easier.
Yeah. Do you think that's probably the biggest thing? We probably will have some younger photographers, maybe college students that are kind of getting started on some of these photo projects. Is that probably the biggest takeaway from that, or are there kind of other takeaways you think they might have when they're kicking off photo projects or starting to brainstorm?
Everybody kind of stumbles on different stuff. I mean, it just depends on what your strong suits are. Some people it's technical abilities, and some people it's the interactions. So, everybody's different. I know we had, some interns that tried to do some photo projects while they were there, but, a lot of them were just kind of the, holy crap, I'm in an internship. I need to get a story for my portfolio. I think I'm going to do this. And they go out, and it wouldn't be anything new, and they wouldn't have a new idea. And I think that's probably the biggest stumbling block I've seen with most students and, and people new to the field is how to kind of get past the cliches and really find something that you can do that's new and original, that's totally different from, what's already been done. And that's the hardest part, because there's so many projects that have been done. But, it's just finding that way and that approach to kind of highlight something different, or a different angle, or just kind of flip it on its head and see, how you can make it totally unique.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that comes from just kind of engaging in your community? Like how do you kind of get at those stories that aren't cliche?
Keeping your eyes and ears open, having a notebook, or, keeping a note on your phone of just story ideas. And when you think of stuff, write it down. And because, so many times, I remember when I was first starting out, I would think of these ideas and I was like, oh, that's great. And then I would forget about it, or, it would come up again. I was like, oh, I just thought about that a couple months ago, and now somebody else already did it. I'm like, man. So, just writing them down, and then don't just kind of let them sit there. Like, actively find out how you can make it happen and get started on it, and then just get started. So many people do this, it's great to do research and the background work, but there's only so much you can do before you start shooting. We're photojournalists. We have to start with shooting, and the research part you can do through the whole project. But you really just need, some quick background, and then make your connections, and then start shooting as soon as you got something viable. And I know a lot of stories just kind of get started at the idea and the research phase, and then they just kind of fall off to the wayside because there's nothing pushing you, those milestones of images where you take something that kicks ass and you look at it and go, oh, this is awesome. That's what keeps your story going. Hardly ever do photojournalists, have a notebook full of notes and no photos, and they're still motivated to go out and shoot stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of, the old adage, ideas are a dime a dozen. Getting actual pictures for your story, that really kind of kicks things and keeps that momentum.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you have to have some sort of progress that makes you feel good and makes you want to continue to see it through.
Obviously, back to the beginning of the story, I interned with you and Sean at the press, and was able to learn a lot. What do you kind of see as kind of mistakes that younger photographers make a lot, or that you see happening more regular that could be improved on?
They don't experiment enough. I see so many photographers, they're keeping an eye out on all the clip contests and, world press and all these, competitions. And they try to mimic these. Maybe they don't try, but they just see it and it kind of automatically incorporates into their work. But I see, I think I even did this with you, is, people would come back from an assignment and they would shoot, for like 15, 20 minutes, and they'd get a shot, and then they would say, I got a shot, and they'd leave. And when you get the shot, that's your CYA. That's like, okay, I got something that's pretty good that I can run. That's a time to kind of push yourself and experiment, like stay longer, switch up lenses. If you got, wide angle-itis, get rid of the 16-35 and put on the 7200 or the 50. Really push yourself once you got the shot that you think is usable to go even further. Don't just stop right there, because you stop right there, that halts your creativity. That halts a lot of progress that you could make, in building everything, visually. And the more you experiment, the more you try new things, the more arrows you add to your quiver. And that's what you ultimately want to do. You want to have this arsenal of skill sets that you could utilize in all sorts of situations, because, if you're lucky enough to have a staff job, more than likely you're going to have to be a freelancer at some point in your life. And editors want somebody that can adapt and do a variety of different types of things in their assignments. They just don't want, somebody to show up at the 16-35, shoot 30 frames until they got a couple of good ones and then leave. They want somebody that's going to shoot something unique and that's telling, and that's, it's got something there that's going to attract eyes to the page, to the link, to whatever it's going to be posted with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. I definitely keep that in mind on all of my assignments I'm working on as a freelancer. It's like you get that vision in your mind's eye of this is probably the shot. And then, yeah, it is really just a license to go out and make something different out of that situation, see it in a unique way. And maybe that turns into the shot.
Yeah, definitely. And no matter what the assignment is, I mean, you know, we all have these crap assignments. I mean, sometimes if you're a newspaper staffer, it's a check passer or some meeting or something that nobody wants to do, but they end up with. Or, if you're a freelance guy, it could be, some sort of portrait assignment that, is of somebody who's like a business guy, and it's not a lot there. But, to kind of go through and really just sit back and say, okay, what can I do in this situation? How can I polish this turd and like make it shine like gold? That's what editors want from their photographers. They want somebody that can take anything and make it shine. And that's, if you can do that, you're well on your way to having a successful career. It's the ones that, take assignments that are crap and come back with crap. That just never works out for the people who are doing that.
Okay. So we've gotten kind of in your story, you've been working at the press for a while now. To kind of spoil the ending here, you're now a freelancer. So tell me a little bit about that transition from a staff position towards the freelance world, and kind of over what time period that happened, your mindset throughout that, just a little bit of story there.
So about 2009, 2010 timeframe, Shauna came on board 2007. I had worked with Jason Hunt from 2000 to 2007. And when Sean came on board, we worked really well together, but I started to realize the shift in how the newspaper was handling photos. The pages got smaller. They were using a lot more wire and courtesy photos, even though we would have a ton of kick-ass photos for them. We go out, even if the reporters never had assignments for us, which was a problem on a lot of occasions. We would go out, and Sean and I would compete, and we would just set up competitions for each other and say, okay, the theme of the day is blue. Go out and shoot something that captures blue. And we come up with, just different stuff to do to kind of push each other, but also get great images. And we get these great images, and they get buried on the inside because they wanted to run this, check passer photo on the front page. And it's defeating, at that point. You're like, man, I'm working all these hours. I'm only getting paid for 40. My work isn't valued anymore, and it's burning me out. And not only that, but all these hours I'm working, I'm missing out on my family time. And I hadn't had a raise in like 5 years. And I was like, all right, what am I going to do? So I came up with an exit strategy, and the exit strategy was to start my own business. I wanted to kind of stay in the Coeur d'Alene area. I had some opportunities in Florida and up in Crystal Lake area of Illinois to take some staff positions, but the timing was never right. My kids were, going into high school, or my wife was starting nursing school. But, if I could stay here and create my own business, I thought that might be a good way to stay in photography and not have to reinvent myself. And so that's what I kind of started to do. And Chip Litherland had taken that role, and he left the newspaper and started up his own business, and he was doing really, really well. So I picked his brain, and he kind of gave me a little bit of insight on his playbook on how to do it well, because he kind of fumbled it the first time and then had to come back to the newspaper, and then left and did it right the second time. So, I just kind of pulled pages out there. I said, okay, this is what I need to know. I need to know how to, I need to know about taxes and contracts and insurances and how to use QuickBooks and marketing and client, delivery and communication and all this other stuff. So from about 2010 to beginning of 2013, every freelance job I took, that money went directly back into my business. I bought, computers, I bought lighting equipment, I bought cameras and lenses, because all my stuff was pretty old, because I always had press stuff. It was brand new. So, for 2.5 years, I just invested in my business. So I had no debt when I was leaving the newspaper for my business. And then in January, I went in and talked to Mike Patrick, the managing editor, and I said, hey, I want to give you guys a lot of notice because I'm going to leave after 13 years. And I gave him my notice for 6 months because I know it's hard to find somebody to take on that role. I gave my 6 months notice, and Sean was kind of being pruned to step into my role as a chief photographer. And then we were on the lookout for somebody to step into his role. And that's kind of the way it all went down. It was an exit strategy more than anything else to spend more time with the family and be able to give myself, a fighting chance to stick into photography, because that's what I knew and that's what I loved.
Yeah. And I think something that's really interesting, a part of that is really just the purposefulness around that decision, about that process. You can talk a little bit about, I saw in in a piece about you, they were talking about kind of accounting for good times and bad times as a freelancer and as a small business. So it seems like you kind of had that very realistic mindset during that transition period. Tell me a little bit about kind of your mindset around sort of accounting for that as a freelancer.
Well, I knew, it wasn't going to be an easy thing. Like right when I first started looking into starting my own business, you read all these articles about in the first 3 years, 75% of businesses fail, and after 5 years, another 10% of those fail, and it was scary. It's like, I'm taking a paycheck and benefits and somebody doing my taxes for me every 2 weeks, and I'm taking control of that, and now I am in charge of providing for my family solely. Like, I am the one that's there to do that, and that's scary as shit. And when you're you go from the military to a staff job to, okay, I have to find a way to generate funds on my own and pay my own paycheck and all this other crap. So that part scared the shit out of me, because it's real. It's so real. So I kind of planned for how I was going to do that. And I wanted to make sure that when I left the paper, I had a fairly fat account for my business account. And, I had a lot of my bills paid off, except for my house and my car. But I just didn't want to go, into freelancing with a lot of debt. So I kind of handled that approach, pretty logically, I would assume, because it seemed to work. But then, there's like a shift in the way people, especially for like weddings seem to kind of be where some of my business was going towards, and what, a lot of my funds were coming from, because freelance, it pops up, the day before, maybe a week or two before, if you're really lucky. But weddings are long-term financial stability. I mean, people book you, at the time I was getting booked out 18 months in advance. So I was sitting up pretty fat for 2013, and I figured 2014, as soon as I gave my notice, I was going to be, have at least half my calendar full, and I didn't. And for some reason, that year is when couples decided that they only needed 9 to 12 months to plan out their wedding. So while I'm sitting there quitting my job with a nice fat bank account, come June, I'm thinking it's going to start building up again. And it didn't. I freaked out. I was like, holy shit, what just happened? I quit my job and now I don't get any business. And so I started searching, Jerome Pollos, worst photographer ever, and just seeing if something's happening that I don't know about. And, my wife talked me off the ledge for a few months, and everything was still manageable, but I'm still freaking out. And then come September, October timeframe, the bookings started coming in again. And then, of course, the winter lull happens, and I freak out again, because your account's nice and fat, and then it starts getting smaller as you get through the winter and into March and April. But, I quickly kind of found out, that business funding is cyclical, and depending on what kind of industry you're in, you can get money, at certain points, and then some parts of the year you're not getting any money in. So you have to plan and make sure you're not spending, your whole nest egg every year. You have to shove some of those nuts back, and make sure that there's something there to last.
Yeah. Yeah. And so after that kind of bumpy patch, things kind of seemed to settle in a little bit. You were able to really kind of nail down your kind of client profile and all that, you think?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about adjustments. I mean, after that, you're continually getting educated as a business owner. And at that point, I realized, okay, I need to make sure I know how I'm managing my funds, and not just knowing how to bring money in, but knowing how to hoard it away and manage that. But then, you start figuring out, your marketing plans and how to attract the ideal client and branding, and all this other stuff, so, you want to do all this at once, but of course it all costs money, and it's all, as a one-man show, there's so much to do. And when you have all that to do, it can become overwhelming. And I got overwhelmed, once or twice, because I was trying to do too much. And I just realized, I don't have to do everything at once. First and foremost, I got to make sure that, I'm bringing in money and my family's taken care of. That's always number one. Number two is making sure my clients are taken care of, no matter if it's a wedding client, a high school senior, a freelance job for an editorial magazine or publication, or commercial work. And then, it's like, okay, once I get all those things taken care of, then it's just trying to figure out how I'm going to adjust every year. And you switch up the recipe every single year. You adjust your pricing, you take a look at your contracts, you make sure that there's nothing that you can possibly outsource or adjust on timelines to make your life a little bit easier on how you're delivering stuff and taking care of production. And every single year you're learning something new. And that's one thing I teach in my mentoring classes is don't just be satisfied when you hit something and you're doing okay. Don't be satisfied. Like, find ways to do things better, or to make something better for your clients, or to bring in more money to your business. Because people forget, like, when you're a freelancer, you have to retire, and Social Security might not be there. So we don't have pensions. So if you don't have enough to, cover, $40,000, $50,000 a year in living expenses once you retire, and, most people probably aren't going to retire nowadays until 65 or 70. Unless you plan on dying at 72, you better have more than $100,000 in your savings.
And part of, being able to make a living is to really create the work that people are going to pay for. So tell me a little bit about, your style and the work that you produce. You've mentioned weddings, you mentioned editorial. Tell me a little bit about your kind of visual style that you kind of try to use throughout your work.
Well, it's really crazy, because when I first started doing weddings, I absolutely hated doing weddings. It was the worst thing ever. Like, I did it because it was what I thought at the time was decent money. I wasn't making much at the press. So, if I made $500, shooting for 6 or 7 hours, I'm like, that's good. I have some money to take my kids on a little vacation in the summertime if I shoot 5 or 6 weddings. And the thing I did is I just basically, when I first started, I shot what I thought people wanted for weddings. And, I looked at the wedding magazines and all the blogs, and I was shooting these contrived, just really kind of cliche wedding photos. And then I had somebody tell me, why are you trying to be a wedding photographer? Why aren't you just a photojournalist who's covering a wedding? And I'm like, that's fucking genius. Why didn't I think of that? So I started pitching myself as that. I was a photojournalist that documented weddings. I just wasn't a wedding photographer. I captured a whole story of your wedding day, and I captured moments and behind the scenes stuff. And, the pose stuff that we're going to do for portraits, those have to be done, but I'm also capturing moments in between those times too. And that's what people started to be attracted to for my portrait work and my wedding work. And for editorial and commercial work, especially editorial, there's nothing different from that. I mean, if you can be creative on an assignment and capture something really well in a timely fashion and caption everything well and know how to deliver on time and on deadline, you can get a job just about anywhere you can. You just have to make sure people know about you, and you're good to work with. But for weddings and portraits, and especially commercial work, if you don't have some sort of uniqueness or predetermined style, a lot of times it's tough to get out in front of people. And for me, I was surrounded by a lot of wedding photographers and portrait photographers who were straightforward wedding and portrait photographers. So being a professional photojournalist in that realm, I immediately stood out. And that was kind of my saving grace, as people kind of looked at it and they said, you don't tone, with these, the yellow faded Pinteresty colors that everybody does. And I was like, well, my toning is just like I did at the newspaper. So now I can remove pimples and facial shine. But I still keep colors, true to skin tones and accurate. And my black and whites are straight black and white. I don't, make them look like, 10 types or, some faded black and white. I just keep it timeless and classic. And that's kind of what has been my brand is timeless, behind the scenes storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love the blog post you put up recently. There was, don't go for trendy, go for timeless. And I think that's exactly that.
Right. I mean, that's what, if you look at photojournalism back in the 80s, and even early 90s, there's always been trends in photojournalism, but those trends go away. The knockaway out of focus head shop, when that photo came out of, I can't remember, it was like Georgia or Chechnya or something when he did that photo. I can't remember how many damn photos I saw in clip contests that we judged of out of focus head shops. And you look back in like the 80s at sports pictures, like there are heavy black vignettes around everything and crazy dodging and burning and darkroom work on Tri-X. But, the stuff that really sticks out, the Vietnam shot from Eddie Adams and, some of the Bobby Kennedy shot. And, they're just straightforward captured moments that don't get old. They don't look trendy. They're riveting. They're moving. They capture something that tells a story.
One of the things nowadays, I think it's the dreaded clarity slider in Photoshop. I've got a blog post that's going to be coming out soon, and it's exactly that. You got to pay attention to what you're doing, because it's just if you don't take a step back and look at what you're producing in kind of an objective way, you might be pretty shocked when you come back and look at it, 5 years down the road.
Yeah, I think the new replacement for clarity is the dehaze slider in Lightroom. Like, people just go nuts with that. I'm like, come on, people.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so to kind of wrap up the episode a little bit here, we've got a quick kind of lightning round series of questions about your photography and about what people can learn.
All right, fire away.
So what's one thing in your bag that you'd never leave home without?
One thing in my bag I never leave home without. Well, besides the camera, I always bring a handheld light meter, just because I usually like walk around a room. It doesn't matter if it's a commercial shoot, editorial, wedding. If I'm in a space that's got tricky lighting, I'll walk around and meter certain spots. So if something comes up, I know I can switch really quickly, not, have my in-camera meter thrown off by something. So that's probably something I always have in my bag.
That's great. What do you do outside of photography that kind of recharges you, kind of gets your energy back, your creative energy?
Oh, I get off the grid so hard. I go backpacking. I do overlanding, which is kind of like extreme car camping. I've never been an outdoors person until I moved up to Idaho. I was always a city kid. And once I got up here, I realized, holy crap, this is awesome. So especially, in the summer when I'm really busy, I try to take as much time off as I can, when I can in the summer. But like come fall and like even in the wintertime, I'll go camping, I'll go snowshoeing and backpacking and, just anything to get outdoors and not sit in front of my computer editing and making phone calls and doing emails.
What drives you to improve your skills as a visual storyteller, as a photographer?
Boredom. I've been, everybody has those peaks and valleys when they're shooting. And when I see that I'm going through these lulls, I'll try something totally different. I've been known to kind of just go out with sometimes like a 300 millimeter lens and do a portrait session. Or if I'm shooting a commercial job, and I have some latitude on something, I'll just take a 50 and shoot it and try something different. So boredom, really kind of prompts me to try something new and try to evolve. And, like I said, always adding another arrow to the quiver.
It is kind of important to just have that versatility. So what advice would you give to like a college student graduating from university, about a career in news or photography?
Well, I mean, if they went to a photojournalism program, I would tell them, don't stop your education there. Start going to business school. Really start understanding the dynamics of contract negotiations and business structures and pricing and supply and demand, because more than likely, a majority of the people who have staff jobs now will find themselves as a freelancer sooner or later. And the ones that don't have that business insight are going to struggle. If you have that business insight, it sets you up so much better in the long run.
Yeah. So before we wrap up here and kind of let people know where they can find more of your work, tell me a little bit about your business mentoring, kind of coaching for photographers that you've just recently started.
Yeah. So while, every time I've had an opportunity to learn something in my career, whether it was through photojournalism or weddings or portraits or anything like that, I always called people and knocked on doors and talked to people. Just to, pick their brain and see what they can do. And some of them were receptive and some of them weren't. And I've been finding lately, because of the business dynamic, especially in our area here in the Inland Northwest, it's really competitive, and sometimes it can be cutthroat. People don't want to share the way they do things or, help people out. So, I had a lot of photographers come to me who were just starting out, and it was one of those things where I just opened up my door. I was like, hey, what do you want to know? Ask me stuff. And sometimes they would ask me simple stuff like this technical photography questions. And I would just turn around and say, okay, well, you're trying to figure out this, but what are you trying to do to make your business, successful? Like, just because you can, about apertures and shutter speeds and ISOs doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. What do you need? What are you doing to make it a success? And most of them didn't have an answer. And so, I'd mentor them and sit around and talk to them and give them insights on, pricing and everything else. And some people took it and some people didn't. And then I had a photographer that used to work at the college contact me and said, hey, I have a friend of mine who's starting her photography business, and I know you help people out, and she's looking for some insight. And so I sat down with her and I talked to her, and me and my wife had been talking about mentoring. And I had this idea to do a three-year mentoring program where, they would sign a contract. There would be a no-compete clause for weddings in particular, because that seemed what most people were contacting me for. And during that 3 years, I would give them, I think it ended up being 84 different topics that we were going to go over. Everything from toning to planning for retirement and everything in between. And she signed up on it for 3 years, and we did this program, and I created PDFs and adjusted everything to kind of fit what she needed. And now she's doing great. I just talked to her this morning, and she's busier than ever. She's, doing well. She's got the workload that she wants, and she's making the money that she wants. And it's awesome. So now, I decided I had all this, these PDFs and all this insight, and I still get contact for people. I might as well just open it up and offer it to people who really want to start a business and be successful at it and hit the ground running. And I tell people, I'm not here to tell you, you're going to make $1 bazillion or you're going to book so many weddings or so many freelance gigs. I'm just here to help you build a solid business foundation and have the knowledge to manage it so you can be successful. And it seems to be working. I got some people that are lined up they're making some strides and understanding what they need to do and how to do it. And it's, it seems to be working for them.
Wow, that's really powerful. That really does kind of differentiate you as a photographer too. So where can people find more about your business mentoring program, or where can they find your work online?
Well, if they search Jerome Pollos Photography, my JeromePollosPhotography.com is kind of my wedding and portrait website, and also has some information about the mentoring on there. And then JeromePollos.com is kind of my commercial editorial website that has an archive of a lot of images I've taken over the years, and it's kind of there to attract my freelance assignments.
Fantastic. Well, we'll have links to all the sites and show notes for this episode, and have some photos from some of the stuff we've talked about, so people can check that out online. Well, Jerome, thanks for coming on the Photo Forward podcast. I think this has been an awesome conversation. I think that students will have a lot to learn from what we've talked about and your site online. So thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thank you, Ben. I think what you're doing is pretty kick-ass. I mean, it's good to have people that are constantly kind of informing the people in this industry and keeping the ideas of, being successful and learning and education out there. It's definitely needed. Good job.
Awesome. Thanks, Jerome.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
Enjoying listening to the Photo Forward podcast? Want to hear more thought-provoking, creative visual storytellers? Well, this is where you come in. We want to get the word out as wide as possible about Photo Forward and reach as many listeners as possible. And the best way to do that is through reviews and recommendations on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume your podcasts. If you want to support more deep dive conversations with photographers, videographers, and storytellers the world over, head on over to the Photo Forward page on iTunes and drop a review or even a rating. It means a ton to growing the show, and I personally read through each and every review to make this show the best damn visual storytelling podcast out there. So, as always, keep seeing, keep shooting, and keep putting your best photo forward. See you all soon.